Part 3, Chapter 3. On the way to the hospital in the taxi, Rena said nothing, just stared through the window. After calling the cops, I had soaked a towel in warm water and wiped her face clean, then led her into the kitchen and made a cup of tea. She kept insisting she was all right now, but her hands shook and she seemed distant, as if she'd taken a couple of tranquilizers. She was able to tell me that Dell was an ex-boyfriend. She had kicked him out a few years ago when she finally realized that he was never going to give up the booze and drugs. Tonight, he had come back, desperate for money, and beaten her up when she refused to give him any. After the cops had told Rena they'd be in touch to take her statement, they cuffed Dell and took him away. Rena wouldn't let the cops radio for an ambulance, so I had called a cab and helped her get into some clothes, which she pulled on over her pajamas. At the Queensway General Emergency Ward, we waited, along with more than a dozen other people, sitting in hard plastic chairs. A wall-mounted TV was showing a tabloid news program. There were a few coffee tables littered with magazines, a couple of vending machines, a broken play center for kids. An old man sat by himself, an IV tube snaking from the back of his hand to a bottle on a stand by his chair. A guy, groaning, his arm in a sling, was being comforted by a young woman. I sat with Rena, my arm around her shoulder. She kept licking her swollen lip, her eyes darting to the door every few minutes, as if she expected Dell to burst in and punch her around again. "I'm thirsty," she croaked. I bought 2 bottles of juice from the machine and turned back towards our chairs. Then I stopped. I saw Rena the way the strangers in the room must have viewed her. Under the harsh fluorescent lighting, her skin was dry and pale, the shiner on her left eye coming up purply yellow, her swollen lip distorting her features. In her eyes was the glazed look of someone who still hadn't quite gotten a handle on what had happened. And then Beth's face flashed into my mind, staring up at me from the library bench after I'd hit her, with that same uncomprehending look on her startled face. As soon as it slithered into my mind, I tossed away the excuse that I had been justified. That had always been my defense. "It's your own fault. You made me angry. You had it coming." I was no different from the low life I had almost thrown down the stairs. 4 hours later, a nurse in blue med fatigues came and led Rena away. I sat and waited, one of only a few uninjured, healthy people in a room full of casualties, until a different nurse brought her back a half hour later. Rena's lip had been stitched up and head bandaged, held at ice pack over her black eye. "We've given her a sedative," the nurse told me, still holding Rena's arm. "Now, before we release her, this hospital has a strict protocol and I'm compelled to ask you some questions. Please follow me." The nurse, a small, thin woman with jet black hair and a no-nonsense manner, led us out of the room to a quiet spot in the hall. She released Rena's arm and adjusted the form attached to a clipboard. "Have you reported this incident to the police?" she asked. Rena nodded vaguely but said nothing. I told the nurse the cops had come to the cafe and taken away the man who had hit Rena. One of them gave me his name and an incident number, I added, taking a piece of paper from my pocket. "The information is there." The nurse nodded as she wrote. "Fine." Then she shook her head with disgust. "Sometimes I think we're living in a war zone. She's the 3rd one tonight." On the way home, Rena dozed, her head resting on my shoulder. I looked out the taxi window at the quiet, early morning streets, thinking about the day Cutter had taken my hands and examined my skin knuckles. I knew now where he had been leading me when he left me his house and papers and personal history. He had wanted me to know why his hold on the real world was so weak, and why he had decided to do away with himself. And until tonight, I had thought I understood. But there was more than that. His story was a mirror that showed me something about myself. He was telling me in his long, roundabout, Cutter fashion that when the darkness comes, from outside or from inside, and tempts you to mine the schoolyard, blow up the building, pick up the gun, throw the punch, then you have 2 choices. The green helmet or the blue one. You can join the war, or you can keep the peace.